It's time to play. Now
we all get sad when a beloved place from our childhood closes its doors forever. It might be a store, restaurant, amusement park, or anything else. In this case, this amusement park, Six Flags New Orleans, didn't close because of competition or low attendance. This park, in the height of its glory, was cut down instantly by Mother Nature, unavoidable, inescapable, and inevitable. This is the tragic story of Six Flags New Orleans. Before we start, I want to thank you guys for 300 subscribers. If you guys enjoy the content that I put out, please subscribe for a new video every Sunday on an abandoned place from around the world. I want you guys to comment down below your favorite amusement park from around the world, and also thanks to Strumoth for being my 300th sub. Let's throw back to the 1600s. The area of New Orleans was also known as La Nouvelle Orleans when the French explorers arrived in 1690. The French made their homes on the banks of Bayou St. John. This was a major Native American trade route at the time because of the flow of the Mississippi River. The French built a fort to protect themselves from the Spanish in 1701, and in 1718 the city of New Orleans was officially established. The Spanish eventually took control of the city in 1763 under the Treaty of Fontainebleau, but in 1800 the French regained control of the city and then they sold it to the United States, and this was in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase. The city of New Orleans was also known as the Old Spanish Fort, but it was decommissioned in 1823 and sold to private developers. Transportation was a big part of the city when the railroad and stream came. New Orleans quickly became a natural spot for people to retreat to at this time. Also in 1823, the Bayou St. John Hotel was being built, and it was the first hotel in the area, and was later renamed the Spanish Fort Hotel. Over the years, the Old Spanish Fort added a casino, theater, restaurants, and a dance pavilion, and even a huge amusement park. This amusement park was known as the Coney Island of the South. The city was known nationwide for its contributions to jazz, and it tagged along with the amusement park crowds, so the musicians had a lot of people coming to watch them, so it made a lot of musicians famous at this time. West End added an amusement park in the early 1990s. While much of the old Spanish fort was destroyed by a fire in 1906, the owners rebuilt and the two resorts competed for business until the 1920s, when the city reclamation projects destroyed much of the West End and moved Lake Pontchartrain's shoreline away from the old Spanish fort. Both resorts closed soon after. Pontchartrain Beach opened in 1928 across from the old Spanish fort, but both the site and the timing proved to be a poor choice. Thanks to the reclamation project that moved the shoreline in the onset of the Great Depression, the amusement park was never profitable, and it soon closed after. In 1939, Harry Bate tried the idea of an amusement park again, and moved the location to the east side of New Orleans. The new location proved to be a success for the park, and the visitors of the park could enjoy family flat rides, roller coasters, games, and food. At the beach, they could also watch stunt divers and swim at the pool. Music being a big part of the city was featured in the park, and Elvis even came to the park once in his life. As famous as the park was, a big portion of the city was kept from visiting the park because of the Jim Crow segregation laws, which was in effect because of the separate but equal laws. For the African Americans, their alternative was the park that opened in 1939, being Lincoln Beach. The area was modeled after the Pontchartrain Beach, and it included a pool, amusement rides, and games and food. For the music, there were concerts every week, including for the Frats, Damiano, Ray Charles, and Nat King Cole. New Orleans was desegregated in 1964, and Lincoln Beach closed since Pontchartrain Beach opened to everyone. But despite the park adding the new rides through the years, the park closed for good in 1983. The area was left without an amusement park. In the 70s, the city of New Orleans was a radically diverse city, and it was thriving. And with oil money flowing into the city, it continued to flourish. But in the late 1980s, the oil bust hit, and unemployment skyrocketed. The whites left for the suburbs, leaving their homes in New Orleans. Section 8 housing began popping up everywhere, and even a huge expensive upscale mall was planned, and the Lake City Forest Plaza was abandoned, and the city began to fall apart. The years went on, and then in 2000, Alpha Smart Park opened Jazzland. It was an odd decision because the state of the city at the time was pretty odd, and the small amusement park opened off Interstate 510 Exchange Like I said earlier in the video, the transportation in the city was great, and it caused Pontchartrain Beach to flourish. But fast forward years later, and the transportation in the city was crumbling. The city was no longer a city for tourism and a city of crime and decay, but the park was the only thing drawing visitors. Jazzland, like Pontchartrain Beach, became a much-loved park, but on paper it never managed to bring in any money. The problem side of the park mainly spurred from the location of the park and lack of transportation. In 2002, Jazzland was closed, and it was about to declare bankruptcy, and the park was sold to Six Flags. Six Flags signed a 75-year lease on the property, so they had the obligation of running the park for the next 75 years. Just remember that for later. Like Six Flags did with Jogga Lake, they did a massive overhaul the next season when they purchased the park. This meant starting it with a new name, Six Flags New Orleans. The park added new roller coasters, flat rides, and a whole new branding and staff. As Six Flags did with Jogga Lake, they also brought a huge marketing campaign to the area. Even though Six Flags had the huge marketing campaign, the park stayed at the bottom of Six Flags properties in terms of profits. With the 75-year lease looming over Six Flags' head, they had to buckle down and figure out something for the long road ahead. At the end of the operating season in 2005, the park was about to announce plans for a new water park, but Mother Nature had her own idea of a water park. As August rolled around, the operating schedule for the park was now limited to weekends only. The park closed on August 21st and planned to reopen on the 26th and 27th, or at least they thought. A hurricane was picking up in intensity off the Gulf of Mexico, and the park focused on storm preparations. The park was shut down for the time being, and the staff put up the now iconic words on the sign out front, reading, "Closed for storm." On the 28th of August, the hurricane reached Category 5 strength. This was the fourth most intense hurricane ever recorded. The National Weather Service predicted catastrophic damage for the New Orleans area. The mayor at the time issued the first ever mandatory evacuation on the TV. President Bush also came out and told the population to follow the orders. The next day, the storm reached the Louisiana-Mississippi border, and the hurricane was recorded in a Category 3, and the winds reached 120 miles per hour. There was a levee system put in place, and this was made to protect the lower parts of the city, below sea level. But this was on the brink of breaking. On the same day, the worst-case scenario happened. 53 separate levee breaches happened, thus filling the city into a bowl. The park unfortunately sat at the lowest part of the city, and it was right next to one of the worst levee breaches in the city. The estimated numbers projected that the storm surge in the area was 24 feet tall, and this was all inside the park. The water had nowhere to go. It took a full month until the city's pumps were even able to get some of the water out. This estimate of damages reported that 80% of the buildings were destroyed, and all the flatlights were unsalvageable because of floodwaters. The only coaster that was in good shape was Batman because it had a corrosion-resistant paint and structure. On the 1st of July the next year, the park made the announcement. The complete assessment of the park concluded the park was a total loss. As I mentioned earlier, the park was one of the lowest performers in the Six Flags company, so the company had no reason to rebuild. But remember how I mentioned the 75-year lease that the company signed? With the city in shambles, crime was a problem and the population was scattered. It was just a mess. Mayor Magan did not want Six Flags to leave the area, so he held them to their lease. This would force the park to at least rebuild to the limits of the insurance claim. The park reported their lost assets were around $33 million, but the insurance company only gave them $11.5 million. The coverage limit for the park was $175 million, so the park announced plans to sue the insurance company. Despite the lease and the city forcing them to stay, the park began removing rides in other parts of the park so they can incorporate them into other Six Flags chain. This, of course, caused some controversy because the park removed Jazzland pieces, and they apparently had no legal claim to do that. And eventually, 2009, the city filed a restraining order to force the park not to remove any other assets. This is a dream for urban explorers to come and explore. The park was easy to get to, and it was a pretty abandoned area in general. Six Flags New Orleans, 14 years later, after closing its doors because of Hurricane Katrina, had become one of the most photographed abandoned places in the entire world. In September 2008, the city and Six Flags reached a settlement to end the 75-year lease. There were as many proposals that had been reported, including an upscale mall, several variations of a new theme park, yet the same problems that plagued Jazzland and Six Flags before the storm remain. And that all compounded on the fact that New Orleans East had been one of the slowest areas to recover from the storm. The film industry also has a big interest because the city decay made a good aesthetic for the movies. There was 3 movies, major films, that were partially recorded in the decaying park: Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and Jurassic World, just to name a few. And as for the future of the park, on August 15th, the city put out in a public statement that they want feedback on the fate of the park. In September, the residents will be allowed to voice their opinion on the fate of the park. The city wants to transform the area into a ziplining park or a hiking area to learn about Louisiana. Other city officials want to demolish the area and build a huge shopping district to bring more jobs to the area. And there's probably many more people that want to develop apartment complexes, housing, and much more. So the future, is just in the fates of time, or in the hands of time. We will never know. But thank you guys for whoever made it to the end of the video. I put out a new video every Sunday. Please subscribe to the channel and share it with some friends.